Audio Unleashed.
So I have an idea.
Okay.
I think since this is an extra special edition of the Audio Unleashed podcast, we kind of need a new tagline for it.
Okay.
And so I can say, audio, and you say
Unleashed.
And I say extreme.
Nice.
Because this is going to be extreme. We're actually going to have a two-part segment on the same topic, but we're going to have a guest. And the guest is
Doug Shcnieder,
who is
the founder of Soundstage Network, my current employer, your former employer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're going to have an in-depth discussion of this. And what we're going to discuss is an article that is in Audiophilia, which is a website, audiophilia.com, that has lots of reviews and stuff. And I really admire their classical reviews. But they have gear reviews as well. And they have an editorial from a speaker designer named Michael Levy, who does Alta audio. And the editorial is titled The Problems with Electronic Testing of Audio Equipment. Our segment's going to be entitled The Problems with Publications that don't know anything about electronic testing of audio equipment, publishing articles about the electronic testing of audio equipment.
Yeah. It's a good way of putting it.
Because this article has a lot of problems.
Yeah, a lot of problems.
And then there's also Facebook. There's so much else to reference. He's actually kind of attacking some stereophile reviews and stereophile measurements. Yeah. And then it gets into some Facebook posts, and it just goes, this thing goes so deep. I have so many tabs open on my computer right now for reference. It is just crazy, but we have a lot to talk about, and it's going to be a lot of fun.
And I want to say before we get there, just in case anybody is tuning in and maybe not familiar with you, Brent Butterworth, and maybe they don't understand the gravitas that you have, that you bring to this issue, I should tell people that you are the editor-in-chief of Home Theater Magazine and the editor-in-chief of Home Entertainment Magazine, and you wrote for Sounded Vision, and you wrote for Home Theater Review and for Audiophile Review. You write for Audio Express. You write for Wirecutter. So needless to say, and you've done a lot of measurements. I would say you're one of the foremost measurement experts on subwoofers for sure, but you've done a lot of speaker measurements as well. And so, I think you're like, who was that when I was growing up? Was it E.F. Hutton? When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. I think
that's good. Not everybody listens when I talk, though.
Well, they should.
Definitely.
They should.
But I've been doing audio measurements since 1997, I want to say. And we're going to get into some of that.
Yeah.
But first.
Before we get there, let's look at, you sent me this article about this new Apple adaptive audio thing. We've got coverage from What Hi-Fi on this. I would imagine there's probably a lot of mainstream coverage about this.
Lots of mainstream coverage. And Apple has a thing on its own website.
Oh, yeah. I saw that. So it doesn't really tell much, though. So I think actually you get more information out of the What Hi-Fi thing, and probably more like, hey, you can understand this in terms of this other feature on this other thing that maybe you've experienced before.
Yes.
So that's maybe where we're going to lean on that one. So I think we should probably start with the Apple adaptive audio thing, because we're going to have two segments on the Michael Levy thing, and we're gonna bring Doug Shcnieder in to bring his perspective in. So let's go on and start with something easy. Let's keep our blood pressure low for a little bit, and then we'll get animated. Okay. So
the basic concept here is that you have these earbuds, whatever you want to call them, true wireless earbuds, like the Apple AirPods Pro. And Apple just announced this at its Worldwide Developers Conference, and what was that, 2 weeks ago? Yeah. So it's an update for the AirPods Pro.
AirPods Pro 2, isn't it?
Okay.
AirPods Pro 2.
Okay. So it's an update for that. It's going to be pushed out this fall, but they announced it now, and they are sending it out to developers already what it does, and this is something that Apple's been kind of nipping around at, and some other people have been nipping around at too, is it basically, in all these true wireless earbuds, or at least a lot of them, you have noise canceling, and then you have a transparency mode that lets sound in. Now, Apple and others are trying to kind of combine those two to where you can leave these earbuds in all the time, and they will not only entertain you with sound of, music or podcast or whatever you're listening to, but they'll also automatically, when they hear you talking, I guess, they know you're having a conversation. And so they will automatically switch to transparency mode and let that sound in.
Yeah.
And then they will also, and they may even like do some hearing enhancement things to where they're more directional and they pick up more sound from in front of you than in behind. And they can also do, the typical voice boost things of, kicking up the frequencies around 2 kilohertz or whatever.
Yeah.
I am super, super excited about this.
I want to be. I'm an Apple fanboy, so I use iPhones and iPads. I don't like OS X, but I'm a Windows guy when it comes to computers. But for mobile devices, I'm an Apple guy, and I've been considering getting the AirPods Pro 2. This might push me over the edge if it works. I'll say this: so Apple is, in a respect, it's kind of easy to say they're late to the party because other manufacturers have done elements of this, and Apple is mostly just putting it all together, right? But I'll say this: Apple has a history of doing that. When the iPhone first came out, they didn't do you couldn't text a picture, right? So they didn't do MMS. It was just SMS. And there's a lot of things that Apple is really slow to adopt. But the thing is, by the time they adopt it, they've usually figured it out. They've usually worked out the kinks. That's not always true, but it's usually true. So when I see features like the conversational awareness, my first instinct is to go, ugh, because I have these Sony headphones, the XM4s, and I love these headphones so much, but they have this speak to chat feature that's similar to this, and it just doesn't work, right? And so it's like you have to turn all of that crap off. The XM4 also has all of these things that supposedly will switch between noise cancellation modes and transparency modes based on your activity, based on your location. You can set it different ways. But the thing is, more often than not, I find, no, just turn that crap off and let me do it manually. But I'm a little eager to see if Apple has figured out how to make it kind of work, because that's kind of what they do. They go steal other people's ideas and they sit on them long enough to make them work, and then they go, we've invented a new thing. Yeah. it's not a new thing. It's just they're the ones who made it work. So yeah. And they came out, so what was it, 6 months ago, they announced this feature where you can leave them in, and in the transparency mode, it'll limit everything. It'll limit all the sound to 85 dB, which is generally considered a safe listening level for 8 hours. And looking at that, I just thought, no way. And I did a bunch of tests and found that in that mode, it was actually more like 95 dB in a really loud environment, which is better than, I ran like 105 dB out of a PA speaker right next to the thing, which is similar to the levels that you would experience in a loud club. And it did knock everything down to about 95 dB on average, which is a hell of a lot better than 105. Yeah. But it wasn't 85. But then I started messing with the noise canceling in there. I found the noise canceling would really knock it down, but then it dulled. It knocked it down into like the low 80s, but then it dulled everything really badly. Yeah. And so I just went to this is actually dovetails with a project I'm working on now for Audio Express. There's a manufacturer of headphone measurement gear called Head Acoustics, and they saw an article I did about my testing with the Apple products, and it's another Wild West thing for me where nobody else is testing it, and I try to figure out ways to test it with my limited resources. And so a guy that Jacob Sondergaard, who has worked at Head Acoustics for quite a while and worked at Gras, which also makes headphone measurement gear before that, he said, hey, we're working with that too, and we would like you to maybe do a visit out here, maybe write about it for Audio Express, whatever.
and look at some of our testing methods we're doing. And they actually have some really, really good, well-defined testing methods for, okay, how do the earbuds respond in a noisy environment when a speaker, someone's talking at you at this level. Mm-hmm. And they have a really nice test set up with about 8 speakers in it's not an anechoic chamber, it's just like a quiet chamber. But anyway, it's just a sealed chamber, so sound doesn't get in, so it's controlled. But it's more analogous to a real room. And they had about 8 speakers going all around it, and they played, different kind of stimulus music and different kind of noises, airplane noise, what have you, and to see how conversation comes through, and also to see how well the hearing enhancement side of it works. And it's really cool. And it's a substantial investment in test gear, although it's test gear that a lot of people already have. And it's like a test that I could actually do this with the gear I have, maybe not quite as well as they do, but pretty well. Yeah. But they actually have like a standardized test routine, that one of these things where you set up the test and you hit the button and you walk away for 45 minutes or whatever. Right. And then it does all these different tests and it gives you all these results. So I'm going to be writing about this in Audio Express, which is a super heavy duty technical journal that granted a lot of people are not going to read, but hopefully they will open that story up to outside readers once I write it. But I'm so excited about this though, because as an older male, my high frequency hearing is starting to go. And I have problems now, like if I'm in a loud environment or a really reflective environment where all the sound's bouncing around like crazy, I have a hard time understanding conversation. It's perfectly fine if I'm out on the street with people, it's great. But like yesterday, I was in an event that had a really loud PA, and they were playing music through the PA most of the time. And boy, I just couldn't understand anything anybody was saying unless I like held my head right up to them. But I was thinking, like, I had some Beats, what is it? The Beats Fit Pro, I think. Yeah. True wireless earphones. And I put those in, and at least that damped down the sound from the PA, so I wasn't getting my ears blasted out. But I really couldn't hear much of anything at that point. But I was like, God, I wish I had something, that would fill my ear up, unlike a hearing aid, because hearing aids, generally don't occlude your ear. Correct. That would fill my ear up and block all the sound coming in, and only let the sound that I want, and do it, with some degree of dynamic operation where it changes depending on the conditions and things like that. And it sounds to me like this is probably that. So let me ask you a question real quick. Yes. If you don't mind giving away a little bit of the secret sauce. You're talking about trying to figure out how to quantify these things and what they do. Can you just give me sort of your first approximation plan for how you would approach testing these things? And because I think most publications who test this, you're going to stick them in their ear. They're going to go, "Hey, Bob from accounting, say something." And they're, "Oh, yep, it worked. That worked." So how would you approach this? How would you begin to approach it? Well, I would do it subjectively. Obviously, I go out and I put these things on and go out and try them. That's really valuable. However, I think combining the two is really great. And so what you want to do is it's very similar to testing noise canceling headphones, in that the sort of classic way is to flood the room with pink noise, with uncorrelated pink noise. In other words, 8 separate pink noise signals, and pink noise is random. So you have 8 random signals coming out of 8 speakers. So it's a super, super diffuse sound field. And then you play that I do it at 85 decibels. Some people do it louder, but you play that, and then you see how much you put the headphone into the test fixture, and you see how much of the sound leaks past the headphone into the little microphone that's inside the test fixture. But with this, like when I did the PA thing, when I wanted to see if these things would actually provide real hearing protection in a concert, I put 2 PA speakers flanking my test bench and played sound at 105 dB. And I made like a little kind of fake, kind of quasi hip hop thing, where it basically goes, dun, 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 dun. So it's kind of EDM meets hip hop, and it was really awful. But I just combined a whole bunch of stuff to where it made like it was music, but it was a quasi noise signal because it repeated.
Okay.
And it was at a very, very consistent level. It didn't jump up and down in level. So it's kind of noise-like, but it was with real music. And then I just recorded, I put that at 105 decibels, and I recorded, I did an LEQ, which is a long-term volume, or SPL measurement over whatever number of seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds, with the music signal to see how much sound leaked in. Now, what I would do to go beyond that is I would take a flat speaker, a recording monitor, more or less, and then I would play. Ideally, there are mouth simulators you can buy from companies like Gross that actually simulate the acoustics of the human mouth. But I'm too cheap. And you can do a decent job with a speaker. If you get, like my little Genelec recording monitors work pretty well. And I would play whatever voice coming out of that speaker. Could be female, could be male, could be quiet, could be loud. And you want to see how well the voice cuts through whatever noise that you have. So ideally, these things would have a combination of noise canceling and voice enhancement. So you're getting rid of all that low frequency hum that you might have in an airplane, but then you're enhancing the voice of the person that you're talking to.
Interesting.
So you'd have a boost at like 2K or something like that. And I'd measure, I'd listen and see how well the voice comes through, but then I'd also measure it with a spectrum analyzer and see if it's actually bringing through those human voice frequencies around 1K, 2K.
Yeah.
And it gets a lot more complicated than that. And especially, and there are like ITU standards for voice communication where you can, send a test tone through it and see what comes through. And you can actually, using algorithms, figure out like what is the measured ability of this thing to reproduce human voice. And that's what Head Acoustics is doing, because they're really applying existing international standards to, which I'm not all that great at, because I often don't have the necessary gear, but they're applying existing international standards to this sort of stuff. It's going to be really interesting there, but that's one of the big problems is it's so much of the quote, like when people write about this stuff now, they're like, oh, I tried it and I talked to Bob in accounting, or I talked to my partner or whoever, and we tested this for all of 3 seconds, and it seems to work fine. Yeah. But a lot of them, as you know, a lot of them, as we've already found, a lot of them just don't work fine.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that you could even do a good testing regimen with just some speakers, some cheap recording monitors with some voices playing, it's like I'm talking about, and just listen to it and just try it just do it purely subjectively with a couple, do it with 3, 4, 5, 6 people. You could do a lot like that. And then, just jot down what you're hearing and get a few people to do it and see if their impressions match. So you don't need to go buy a ton of test gear. You could just some really cheap recording monitors. Yeah. And you just have to try. You could throw this test together in a day. Yeah. And I might even do that. That's a good idea.
Hey, I got a little bit of a challenge for you, buddy.
Okay. I'm always up for that.
Yeah, we're ready. It's time for us to move into a music break and take a break for a minute, because we got to come back and deconstruct some BS. But I'm thinking, have you ever seen the Looney Tunes cartoon Bully for Bugs?
I have not.
So he basically goes to war with this big black bull, right? And at one point he's standing there with a red cape and he's just like whipping this bull into a frenzy. And right now I kind of feel like that, because I feel like I'm pulling out this red cloth and I'm about to whip you into a frenzy. So go listen, go watch that cartoon and give me some music that sort of evokes that Looney Tunes musical palette.
I will very quickly throw together some kind of music that you'll have to text me after this and tell me what it was, and I'll watch it. I'll try to do something that emulates that.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a prelude to a blood pressure increase, because we're going to come back and we're going to talk about some infuriating things. Yeah. But anyway, let's take a break. Let's get some water. Let's come back. Let's do it.
All right.
back from the break.
Yeah,
and we are about to get riled up here.
And this is audio
unleashed.
Extreme.
We're so stupid.
This is going to be like a tractor pull.
Yeah. Oh, man. So anyway, not long after we recorded our last episode, you started working on the idea board for this episode, and you dropped this thing in about this article published in Audiophilia by Michael Levy. And I'll just say that you had some strong words and leave it at that.
Yeah.
And then shortly thereafter, Soundstage founder and publisher Doug Shcnieder, your former boss, my current boss, posted about it on Facebook. And needless to say, the conversation was quite animated. And boy, to say that there was a lot of tribalism would be underselling it. And then you also pointed me to another Facebook post from Anthony Kershaw about this. So we've got a lot of to mine here for the conversation. Where do we even start? Do you want to just start by talking about your reactions to the article itself before we even saw this social media brouhaha?
Yeah, sure. So I follow Anthony on Facebook because I love his classical reviews. And very, very qualified because he's a flautist and a conductor and really knows his stuff. So he posted this thing. I'm like, oh, Michael Levy. So I was somewhat aware of Michael Levy. I met him maybe like 25 years ago when he first started out. I don't think I've seen him since. But I read Stereophile, and so
we should say who Michael Levy is, by the way.
Well, he's the designer of these speakers, these Alta audio speakers, right?
Alta audio, yeah.
And so, it's kind of not much happened with him for a long time. Then I think this brand kind of surfaced about maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and he's been pretty successful with it. I think he's got a lot of good reviews. But, in Stereophile, I've been watching this, and, I read the measurements in Stereophile, of course. And, Herb Reichert in Stereophile reviewed one of his speakers and found that the male vocals were colored. John Atkinson ran speaker measurements and said, yeah, there's all these port resonances in it and all this stuff, because Michael Levy uses what's called a transmission line design. Okay. And which is not used all that commonly because it's kind of space consuming, but it does have certain technical advantages if done correctly. Now, let me go. Shall I go into a transmission line theory for just a second?
I was about to ask that you do. Just describe for people who might not be familiar with the technology what a transmission line design is.
So a transmission line, normally with a woofer in a box, it's a sealed box maybe, or it's a ported box, and the port is comes in below the driver resonance and kind of reinforces the low bass of the driver, right? With a transmission line, and then you stuff the box like crazy because all the reflections and things inside the box will get out the speaker driver itself is not a brick wall. It is a thing that moves back and forth. Yeah. So anything that happens in that speaker box, if it hits any sound waves that hit that driver from the backside, are going to come out the driver and interfere with the original sound that's supposed to be coming out of the driver. Okay. So with a transmission line, it basically acts, and those can be way out of phase and filtered and all sort of stuff. With a transmission line, it basically, I'm stealing this right out of the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook, which has a whole chapter on transmission lines.
I'll link to that again in the show notes.
Always worth reading. So what a transmission line does is it basically kind of reverses it's a big long tube that goes, out from the back of the speaker. And the best example is the B&W Nautilus. Have you seen that speaker? The big snail-looking thing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Where every driver has its own big, long tube coming out of the back of it. Yep. And basically that tube works as a phase inverter for the back wave of the woofer. And so it reinforces instead of destructively messing with the sound. And however, the tube itself has resonances that have to be damped. All right. Yeah. So you fill it full of stuffing. And the Loudspeaker Design Cookbook has a short version of somebody did a doctoral paper on this that's really good, that examined all the different ways to stuff it and blah, 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 blah. And so, if you don't stuff it, then these resonances come out, typically a transmission line has a port at the end, but usually not a lot comes out of it because it's all been kind of deadened. Some of them don't even have a port at the end. So what these Alta audio speakers do is they're a short transmission line, which according to Loudspeaker Design Cookbook requires more stuffing. But because, the big long, you want a short one probably because if you have a big long tube at the back of your speaker, no matter how you fold it, you're going to end up taking up a lot of space.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway.
It's going to look like something that the Blue Man Group would play. Right.
That's a good analogy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So anyway, Michael Levy has, very uncommonly does short transmission lines where he does not stuff the back of it. And so all these resonances that happen inside the tube are not damped and they come out. Now, and John Atkinson's measurements in stereophile with 2 different Alta audio speakers have picked this up. Mm-hmm. And the measurements look like hell. I mean, they're the lower frequency stuff is just sort of all over the map. And it's hard. And then he also puts a port there for the mid-range, which also throws another wrench into the works. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean it's necessarily bad, okay? But, it's according to Loudspeaker Design Cookbook, according to John Atkinson, et cetera, not according to me because I haven't tested that many transmission lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, I can't remember. Since these resonances are undamped, I mean, I think Vance referred to them as horrific, and they're pretty extreme. So the measurements for these things look pretty bad. However, they've gotten a lot of good reviews. But of course, here at the Audio
Unleashed
podcast, we know that anything can get a good review.
Oh, yeah.
Just because some guys who are supposedly experienced listeners, look, I'm an experienced driver. I've been driving for like 45 years. Mm-hmm. I can get down the street perfectly fine. I'm not an expert driver. I never worked at it. Okay. Yeah. Listening to a bunch of speakers does not make you an expert on audio. All right. No. And so there's all these guys that do this who really don't have any expertise and just kind of emotionally react. I'm sorry, you were going to say?
I was going to say there's also the advertising element. I mean,
of course,
many years back, I was working for a publication, and this was like I was just about to quit. And the publisher came to me and said, "Hey, we've got this new receiver. I need you to do a really good review of this receiver because we want to bring them on as an advertiser." And I did the best review I have ever done in my life. And I found all kinds of problems with it. They had a new room correction scheme, and it was terrible. It was just awful. But it was one of the best things I ever wrote. I just deconstructed all of the problems with this product completely. And it was airtight. And I took it, and the publisher said, "Well, you didn't understand. I told you I needed a good review of this product. We're trying to get them as an advertiser." I was like, "This is the best review I've ever written." And he was like, "You're not picking up what I'm laying down." So anyway, he took the product, gave it to somebody else, and I read the review eventually because I'd quit working for that publication, and it was glowing, which that's what they wanted. And look, I'm not accusing every publication of that. I wouldn't even accuse most publications of that. I'm simply saying some of that does exist, right? Because I've experienced it firsthand. So audiophilia is, I'll just say, very friendly to high-end audio manufacturers. So Michael Levy did a guest column in there of the Alta audio guy, and basically it's kind of obvious that he's complaining about the bad measurements he gets in stereophile. Well, let's just start with the title of the article.
Yeah,
the problems with electronic testing of audio equipment.
Yeah. Which should be the problems with Michael Levy's understanding of the electronic testing of audio equipment. And we're going to get into those.
Yeah.
Because I am not going to sit back and allow someone to spew BS and also to basically attack to question the competence of one of the most competent people in this industry. Mm-hmm.
being John Atkinson.
Being John Atkinson, yeah. Yes. So I'm going to be referring to a lot of different things in here. So on the Facebook post that which Anthony Kershaw put up, Michael Levy gets on there and comments, and he says, "We need better tests that are tied to what the listener hears and the environment he is in."
Well, it's a real shame that Floyd Toole didn't write a whole dang book about that.
Yeah, I know.
It's a real shame that
Floyd Toole should write a book about this.
He should. It's a real shame that,
and he should have done it 10 years ago.
Every Canadian speaker manufacturer doesn't build their speakers based on that research that was all about the correlation between objective measurements and subjective listening impressions. It's almost like what he's asking for, it's only been around for 30 years now. So
yeah,
of course he hasn't had time to really hear about it. So that's not on him.
It's a lot of reading those papers, man.
I know.
But it's like, we already have that. We don't.
Yeah.
We know that this is so well done by some of the best minds that have ever existed in the audio business. And for someone to just come in and say, well, we need better testing.
Yeah.
No, you need better understanding. Sorry, you're wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like someone who's into astronomy saying, not knowing of the existence of galaxies. I mean, It's just utterly ridiculous. And
I'll go one step further. I'll go one step further. There is, to me, look, nobody can read anybody's mind. I cannot read Michael Levy's mind.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's thinking.
Yeah.
All I can do is look at his behavior and compare it to other people's behavior. And his behavior bears a strong resemblance to people who are what James Randi called flim-flam artists.
Okay.
Now, again, to be clear, I'm not calling Michael Levy a flim-flam artist. I'm saying his language is exactly like theirs. It's a very strong reliance on emotional disgust. Once you basically are using emotional disgust as a hook for your argument, you've moved out of the realm of real inquiry and you're selling something. And also he's just completely inconsistent. Like he gets into a back and forth with Stephen Stone, who is, longtime industry writer, formerly with Audiophile Review, writes for the Absolute Sounds. He gets into it, and basically says, LOL, Stephen, of course I'm not against testing. It's like, well, you've just gone on this long rant about testing, and now you want to see, nope, I love testing. I just think we're testing the wrong things. Well, if you think we're testing the wrong things, do a study, figure out what is predictably the relationship between objective measurements and subjective listening, and publish your own dang book, right? You can't just say, well, I believe we're testing the wrong things. Well, what should we be testing then? He's offering no solutions. He is just trying to get his base riled up.
Right. So but here's one of the things that really irks me. And one of the things that works to his advantage until you get onto the audio
Unleashed
podcast, because there are only, I think there's only two guys in the press that are super, super experienced at quasi-anechoic measurement. And one of them is John Atkinson and one of them is me.
Yeah.
There's a couple other guys that do it, but a lot of them have clipple analyzers where you just shove the speaker into the thing and hit a button and walk away. But the way John and I do it, we really have to have a lot of knowledge and experience. So Michael Levy's saying the reference for loudspeaker testing is an anechoic room. Well, okay, everybody else in the whole world calls it a chamber, and they're basically like 2 stories high to start with. Yeah. So calling it a room is that's a little weird to me. It's like, are you really not familiar with the nomenclature? But whatever. The method used is to play various test signals such as sine waves or square waves. Now, I've been testing speakers since 97. I've used, most of the major analyzers on the market. I've owned several of them. I've never used a square wave to test a speaker. Now, this leads me to believe this guy's never measured a speaker. So Certainly not with all the commonly available analyzers that are out there. Maybe he runs a square wave and looks at it on a spectrum analyzer, but what that would tell you, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And then he starts saying, square waves and sine waves have little in common with music. It's like, well, and first of all, and if he knew anything about quasi-anechoic, he'd know that with the system that John Atkinson uses and the one I use, you can use sine waves, but usually if it's FFT based, you're using a logarithmic chirp, which is like bloop, or you're using pseudo random pink noise, which is like right, and the more I read this, the more I think, and then he criticizes because the way that John Atkinson measures the bass response to these speakers in the way that has been common for decades, as detailed in books by Vance Dickinson, Joe Diapolito, basically every book that's been done on this stuff. When you measure speakers, you want to minimize the room interaction, or ideally, you want to get rid of it entirely, right? And the reason why is there's that Canadian/Harman research, which is codified into the CTA 2034 standard now, which says, here is how measurements that are done quasi-anechoically or anechoically correlate with listener impressions. If you incorporate the room into there, you don't know what's going on because every room is different. And so the measurements you make in your room do not correlate with the measurements that somebody else makes in some other room, except under a few tight conditions where you're doing averaging over a lot of different, positions and things like that, which is not what he's talking about here.
Right.
So
wouldn't square waves, that's typically, you're using those in measuring amplifiers, right? You're looking at slew rate, things like that. So why does he think that has anything to do with loudspeaker measurements?
I would say because he's never measured a loudspeaker. That's my guess. That's a guess.
That's a really good guess. Solid.
I don't know that to be the case.
I think you've got a good hypothesis there to work with.
But as someone who's demonstrably measured loudspeakers for a long, long time, who's got measurements of umpteen zillion loudspeakers right there on the internet you can go look at, and this guy shows no measurements on his site, and he shows that so he also criticizes, John Atkinson for, close miking. What you do if you don't have a big space to work in, you don't have an anechoic chamber, you don't have a backyard, and John Atkinson lives in Brooklyn. He probably doesn't have a backyard or much of one. You close mic, you put the microphone right at the woofer, like a 1/4 inch off of it, and then you put the microphone at the port, and what you do is you sum those responses. You do not splice them together. You sum them, which I think Michael Levy or somebody was saying that you're splicing these things together. No, you sum them. You sum the port and the woofer. And then, there's some math behind that you have to do, and you have to know what you're doing. But for those of us who do it, it's not hard, and people have been doing it for decades. And now all of a sudden this guy is coming up and saying it's not valid. And he's also saying it doesn't get rid of the room, which it does. You can see it in the curve. Like when you do an in-room measurement, it's bumpy as hell, right? You've seen those. Yeah. It's bumpy as hell. When you do a measurement of a piece of electronics or something, it's a smooth curve. Right. And when you measure close mic with a woofer or something like that, it's a smooth curve. The room interaction is not in there. If you'd done this, you'd know this. Yeah. Okay? And so I just get so infuriated because John Atkinson knows, I learned half of what I know about these kind of measurements by reading John Atkinson's stuff.
Because John explains what he's doing and why, right?
He does. And, and even in the places where, look, it's better to do what they call a ground plane measurement, which is where you take the speaker, say outdoors in a big space, you put the mic 1 meter from it or 2 meters from it or whatever, and then you run a sweep, and then you smooth it to get rid of the reflections from your nearby fence maybe. And you get something that looks pretty good. If you do it the way John does, you get a little boost around 100 hertz or so. You get a little extra bass in it of a couple of dB but he acknowledges that in every set of speaker measurements he does. So that's fine.
Getting back to what I was saying earlier, where I really take issue with this sort of emotional manipulation that he does in this post on Audiophilia. Let me just read a little passage here. He's talking about, first, we must understand that we exist at the bottom of a sea of air. He said, an anechoic room is so unnatural that in a recent New York Times article about one, They mentioned that being in one was torturous. We're using an anechoic room because it is supposed to be a neutral environment, and it is not. Here's why I have a problem with that. First off, that New York Times article had nothing to do with scientific study.
Right.
It was simply, hey, we keep talking about these quietest room in the world. What is it like to be in one, right? Second off, a lot of that writing about how, the psychological damage done by an anechoic chamber is BS, right? So some years back, I took a trip to Paradigm Anthem, Paradigm, legendary speaker manufacturer in Canada. And they were talking about how, they say being in an anechoic chamber freaks you out, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, hold my beer, sir. So at lunchtime, I was just like, I want to stay in here. And they're like, it'll drive you crazy. And I'm like, but have you actually, have you done it? Like, what does it do? And they're like, I don't know. It's just, no, it'll drive you crazy. So while they all went to lunch, I was like, put me in there and shut the door, right? I was in there for over 90 minutes, and they say half an hour will drive you crazy. It's entirely possible that I'm just already crazy. I don't know. My mother did have me tested, but they had to come drag me out of there 90 minutes later, like, okay, you've proved your point. Let's go. It was just about the most delightful afternoon that I can recall having in all my years. It was amazing. And so would I say then therefore that means it's a perfect environment for testing speakers? No. One thing has nothing to do with the other. Stop bringing this emotional reaction bullcrap into a discussion about why your feelings are hurt by anechoic chambers. It is manipulative, it is wrong, and it again is the sort of language that makes me look at it and go, I'm not convinced that you have good intentions, sir. Again, I can't read his mind, but this makes me even more suspicious. So
all right, let's pile on some more.
Yeah.
So he's talking about how, there's so many similarities between a cello or a stand-up bass and how they're designed and how loudspeakers are designed. And then he says, I've never seen anyone put padding in their Stradivarius to make it sound better. Roger Van Bakel says, fair point. Jim Austin from Stereophile jumps in at the bottom with a foot point that's like, no. And Brent Butterworth, who owns 2 stand-up basses and I don't know how many speakers, says this is like the stupidest crap. And so,
I mean, it's sort of like if you said, to truly recreate like vocals with a speaker, you would have to make the speaker out of bones and meat and sinew, right?
Yeah. Right. Good analogy. But instruments work in a different way. As Jim Austin points out in his footnote, he's like, hey, the second harmonic of a violin is typically like 5 dB below the root. So instruments are designed to sound good, to have lots of resonance, to have all sorts of different harmonics. And they were designed over a long period of time to where they sounded good to people because of all the stuff that they add to the fundamental. Yeah. That's all they are. Yeah. If you listen to a fundamental tone on anything is just a sine wave.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's all the stuff you add on top of it that gives it the character. If a speaker does that, the speaker is giving its own character to the sound, which again, you may find that people like that. However, it's not what we're doing here. We're trying to be transparent. We're trying to let the artist's intent come through, not for some speaker manufacturer to add a whole bunch of extra stuff that he thinks sounds good and that some gullible reviewers think sound good.
Yeah, yeah. Do we want to go ahead and invite Doug in? Do we want to? We need to get him to call in.
Let's get Doug. We need a calmer voice here. This is Audio
Unleashed.
Extreme. We're only going to do that this one time, probably.
Probably.
So we have a special guest now joining us.
Special guest, yeah.
All the way from Ottawa?
Ottawa, Canada.
That's Doug Shcnieder. Doug is the founder of the Soundstage. Should I say you're the founder of Soundstage Networks?
Soundstage Network or Soundstage? That's good.
Okay.
Yeah,
which is a big sprawling site. Actually, it's a group of about 9 separate sites all under one banner that covers a million different aspects of audio, from super, super high-end stuff to medium stuff to home theater to headphones to all sorts of things. Mm-hmm. And Doug, the reason we've brought you on here today is because we've been talking about this article that Michael Levy did for Audiophilia. And I had kind of hipped Dennis to it, and then like right after that, he saw that you had posted something on Facebook complaining about this article, and so we kind of thought we'd get you on, and also to get you on from a publisher's perspective, because we kind of don't understand why publications would do this.
Yeah, I have some theories on that, I guess.
Okay, good. So
what did you on us? Yeah.
All right. Well, what did you think of this article by Michael Levy?
Well, the interesting thing was I don't read many of the publications, and I saw this scrolling by on Facebook, and I saw this. I can't remember what the title is, but it basically about how measurements are wrong today. And I thought, well, that's weird. So I clicked over and I looked, I read the whole article, and I thought, wow, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. Like, no idea. Yeah. And I wondered why he would write it in the first place. And then I have some theories on why someone might publish it.
Okay.
And one of the theories, do you want me to go on with them?
Please.
Yeah.
Straight up clickbait, it could be straight up clickbait, So what you have is just put some stuff out there and hope someone clicks on it. And, measurements are always good for clickbait, but I think there's more to it. I'm just guessing. And, do you ever, taking it down to the, say the more micro level, to the reviewer level, do you ever find those reviewers who just like to disparage what the mainstream reviewers are doing?
Of course,
So at the micro level, you get these guys who are just out in left field because it's cool to be out in left field, right? Mm-hmm. And I've noticed there's a tendency of publications that don't do measurements and at the same time don't seem to understand measurements to like to publish articles that somehow disparage measurements. And I would guess that was the motivation here. I'm not sure if maybe there was an advertising motivation. I don't know if it was a paid for article to be on there or they just wanted it on there. But I would guess it was a knock at measurements, because as far as I know, Audiophilia doesn't do measurements. And
they don't.
We see this on, videos all the time and that sort of thing. And ironically, it comes from the people who don't do measurements. And when you ask them about them, they don't really understand them. So that's my guess, is partially, let's get some traffic. Hey, and then let's partially take a dissenting view of the mainstream and see where it goes from there. Unfortunately, anybody who knows measurements reads that article, and the person who wrote it looks really bad, and the magazine looks really bad too.
Yeah. Because not only does it certainly look, to anyone who's done measurements, you have to look at what this guy wrote and go like, I don't see any evidence that he's ever done a measurement. And number two, Stereophile wouldn't have published this. You wouldn't have published this. But some publications don't have anybody there who understands just the basics of the technical side of audio, so they don't see through this.
Yeah, and what was really weird about this article, I'm trying to still figure out why Michael Levy wrote it. I have some ideas on that, but I think it should have been published with the disclaimer of, we don't necessarily agree with any of these comments, but to publish it as an article like meaningful, I don't get why anybody would do that, because it just makes them look bad.
Well, I do have one thought on that. I think that, hey, look, man, measurements are hard to do. You spend a lot of money to get them done at the NRC. You've also bought a lot of gear. I've bought a lot of gear. I've spent thousands of hours sitting here trying to get the gear to work right. It doesn't exactly come with a good manual. So measurement's hard and it's expensive. And it's not always expensive, but it's often expensive. And you got to have somebody who knows what they're doing. And so what's easier, just to do that, or to just say, oh, measurements are stupid. Oh, and by the way, if you say that, then you don't have to read the Floyd Toole papers that explain why we do measurements. You can just ignore that and go read your ookie mookie reviews of some dude who sits in front of some weird speaker and says that it has lots of inner detail.
Well, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
look at there has been a lot of negative reaction to this article on the social medias, but you also have to acknowledge there's been a lot of incredibly positive reaction too. I mean, there are basically people going, well, thank goodness somebody's saying it.
Oh, really? I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that. But you know, social media tends to be your own little world of like-minded people. People are applauding it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow.
You know, people basically just sort of the whole, you know, all knowledge is merely opinion crowd, right? They're really celebrating this as they're treating Levy as like, oh goodness, it took a lot of courage to say what you just said. So that's disheartening.
Yeah,
but I guess what I'm getting at here is, to a degree, it also explains why a publication would be so willing to run this, because they're like, hey, there's an underserved demographic of lunatics here.
Oh yeah.
Well, if that's your goal, if your goal is not to find any sort of truth and it's to attract the crazies, well, I guess that's one thing. But what's really surprising to me is what you said there, Brent. Okay, there is this idea of, well, we don't do measurements, they're expensive, or we don't have the technical ability, so we'll disparage them. Why disparage them? Why don't you just say, hey, we don't do them, and then ramp up your listening tests and stuff, instead of saying the measurements don't matter? Do what you do and do it really well. It's like not having a car and saying, well, cars don't matter. Cars are BS. Well, no, I don't have a car. Say I do, but let's say I don't have a car. You do. And we just go on.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the number of people who are just resorting to outright non sequitur here in attacking measurements. I mean, and I guess that goes back to what we're saying. They don't know how measurements are done. They don't know the value of measurements. They don't know how we use measurements. So, of course, their attacks are just going to be non sequitur.
Well, also, too, okay, like to throw the measurements aside, but let's take one thing. And Mike Levy, as you know, he kind of built up on my wall. He was responding to a lot of things, but he wasn't responding directly. But it was a former reviewer of ours, Dan Kong, who pointed out on my wall, hey, what about the sensitivity? And I look back at Atkinson's measurements, and he, Alta claims 87.5 dB on a certain loudspeaker, and John measured 81.5. Now, John does it quasi-anechoic and stuff, but I've never seen a wide discrepancy between the way we do it anechoically and his measurements, within half a dB, whatever. 81 dB, that's not the end of the world. I've seen speakers lower, actually, but it is concerning. You got a 6 dB difference in your sensitivity that somebody might gauge their amplifier on, and that 6 dB is a quadrupling of amplifier power. Plus, also, you're jamming a lot of power into a little speaker. So be aware that measurement matters, even to those who say it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And John's measured a zillion speakers over the last 25 years. His method, it's all right out there. It's published. His methodology is out there. Whereas Alta Audio is running these, giving these sensitivity measurements and not saying what their methodology is. I mean, I know what John's method, he doesn't exactly explain it, but I know what he's doing. He's basically taking a 2.83 volt signal to do his measurement. Then he's averaging that over a B-weighted span. And but we don't know how Alta, we don't know that they measured it.
Maybe at one of those massive resonant peaks.
Maybe
right
so.
There. Maybe at the isolate said, hey, we hit 87 dB right there at 100 hertz.
Yeah, that could be that. That could be what he thinks sensitivity is. But that's the problem is you and I look at this and know, like, I see no evidence that he's ever done a measurement.
Yeah.
No, and this is where when I was going back and forth and I was going back to the article, I'm like, how can you say, and I even put, in one of my posts, have you ever heard of Dr. Floyd Toole? Like, how can you say, well, we need correlations with measurements and listening? Well, haven't you seen any of this? Like, it's
for
decades
25
old
years.
now.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah. Oh man!
Yeah,
and at one point, he's talking about how can you explain the fact that these things measure so poorly, but all of these reviewers think they're great. Well,
I'll explain it a couple ways. You can always find some Yahoo who thinks something's great, and those goes back to the real kind of, hey, the more out there, the better. And I brought up Talon Audio. We don't have to get into it, from 20 years ago. Now, there was a POS loudspeaker, number of them. Yeah. Okay. And suddenly they were heralded as the greatest loudspeakers on earth, even though they had no high frequencies, rolled off by 20 dB about when you got to 20 kilohertz.
I also, maybe I just had a realization, the thing where he's saying, I'll take the, expertise of a reviewer over measurements any day. Maybe that's how he came up with his sensitivity rating. Maybe he got some audio guru to come in and go, that sounds like 87.5 dB. And he went, there you go.
Well, there could be another way. You take an 81.5 dB loudspeaker anechoically, and you put two of them. Now you're up 3 dB, right? Mm-hmm. So you're up to 84 and a half. Then you put them in a room.
Oh yeah.
And you got two speakers in a room.
Boundary gain. Yeah.
You're close to 87.5 dB.
And don't disparage measurement, and don't say we don't have any research that shows how measurements correlate with listening impressions.
That was the worst part. No research. We got to do some research. And look what these reviewers said. And the best one was, I still don't know exactly, no ordinary listener.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Remember that one? No ordinary listener.
Ooh, man.
I guess we're ordinary.
Yeah. Kissing up to the
guru.
Yeah.
to all these brilliant, artistic geniuses who write these speaker reviews for all these publications.
But getting back to reviewers, you guys have probably got more experience than me. Hmm? There's always been yahoos around who will trumpet anything, right? Yeah. Crazier the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
You guys must have met them. You guys must have
Dennis
managed
has the most experience with that.
Unfortunately.
And you get a hold of one of these reviewers and he tells you, oh my God, he or she, you've got the greatest thing in the world, and you believe it.
Yeah. Yeah. At a previous publication, I think I alluded to this in the last episode of Audio Unleashed, maybe, but a previous publication I was working for, we had a high-end amplifier with a reviewer who specialized in high-end gear. That's basically all he did was super esoteric high-end stuff. This amplifier, super competent. Right? You look at it, technical specifications, it does all of the things an amplifier should do, stable into 2 ohms, really good slew rate. Output impedance is exactly what you would need it to be. Whatever. You look at a totally technically competent amp. He listens to it and he just hates it. It's dry. My wife was all the way in the kitchen and she said it sounded like a robot, and just all of this crap that just has no correlation with reality. And the publisher ended up having to spend over $1,200 out of pocket to ship that amp to another reviewer, rather than going live with the review from the reviewer who hated it. But again, the reviewer who hated it was just having a bad day or whatever. But it happens,
Yeah.
So
the thing is that he's using as a paradigm for good measurements that were done by secrets of, everyone just calls it secrets, whatever it's called, secrets of hi-fi and home theater, whatever.
Yeah, home theater and hi-fi. Yeah.
And the guy had just used Room EQ Wizard and put a microphone a foot in front of the speaker.
Yeah.
And he was using that as a paradigm for a good measurement. So that incorporates the wildly random room reflections and room resonances. And also it's too close to the speaker to actually pick up all the different drive components in their desired blend. You never measure a speaker. Yeah, you can close mic things like that for certain applications for measuring bass, but you don't get the full frequency response that way. You have to pull back like a meter at least to get the frequency response of these products. And he doesn't seem to know that either. And he didn't find, he's saying this is a paradigm when this is just an obviously incompetent measurement. And I don't mean to trash the secrets guy. I can't remember what his name was, but like,
no, it was just as far as I know, he didn't go and say, oh, here is my measurement that shows what it done. This guy just grabbed it. It was an in-room measurement.
And it's like 6 dB down at 5K, you know, so it's you know, the fact that the guy's holding it up as some paradigm, also you should have looked at that and went, maybe don't parrot that.
Now, he does make a point that like, you know, those are pretty high Q resonances. We don't know how audible they are, but don't trash measurements because they found, you know, the flaws in your design philosophy. It might sound good, but until we have blind tests with multiple listeners that say your speaker sounds good, which he doesn't have, and he'll never have that. Could, but I know that. Look, I've been. That's why I always say, like, well, what if, you know, such and such a high-end audio publication, we know, that doesn't do measurements and says this one reviewer has it right. Well, what if you panel tested it? But I always say they're not going to do that because they're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And you know, he has like nothing to stand on to prove that his methodology is right. He could just do panel tests, just test it and find out if it works or not, just like they did at the NRC 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, you know what was kind of funny? And if you go to my wall, there's a guy named Karl-Heinz Fink. He's a great speaker designer out in Europe, and he's worked on dozens of designs for different companies. He's, I won't say, well, kind of a hired gun like those studio musicians, right? Plus he owns Fink Team, and plus he owns EPOS now. But he's done many designs. But at first he, not defend, but he kind of is pretty open-minded. Hey, the measurements, you got to be careful. And then he says, oh, wow, I did look at that, and that's a pretty horrible response. Like, how did you get it that bad, basically? Now, that said, I will say something Levy kind of got right. Now, his base response below 100 hertz from John's measurements is horrendous. Horrendous. It's all peaking and stuff, and all those resonances. But when I look from, and Paul Barton taught me to do this years ago, when I look from about 100 hertz to 20 kilohertz, he gets a decent trend. It's not flat, but at least it's not way bright. It's not way too dull. It's going to have a sound, but he kind of got all that in the ballpark, let's say. Not right in the ballpark, but, you know, within he got that right, but all those resonances and stuff, come on, fix them up.
Gents, I think it's about time to wrap this up because we're running along, and I think we could run longer if we wanted to. So
we could go a couple more hours easy.
I think we could.
I have so many things I wanted to say that I never even got a chance to say.
I will say, though, like, there is one piece of art that I would love to quote in regard to all of this, and I think it's perhaps not as troubling. So Doug and Brent and I have talked quite a bit before about this 9-minute jazz-backed beat poem by Tim Minchin called Storm, and there's this wonderful quote that I'd love to ask Michael Levy. Is knowledge so loose weave a morning when deciding whether to leave your apartment by the front door or the window on the second floor? I mean, these people want to denigrate knowledge and understanding and science and physics when it comes to selling their product, but they sure believe it before they jump out of an airplane. You know, it's just, I mean, that really gives the whole game away, doesn't it?
All right. You guys want to wrap it up? Because this is going to be a lot for me to edit.
Let's do it, man. Yeah.
A lot.
Oh, yeah. I think this is going to be an episode where we're going to need a director's cut.
Yeah.
Doug, thank you so much for joining us.
Was that what you wanted from it?
We just wanted you to come on and hang out, man. It's we just want to come on and have a fun conversation, get a perspective from you that we couldn't get from ourselves. So, yeah absolutely. So, do we want to do some credits, Brent?
We want to do some credits.
Yeah.
This is a Butterburger production.
Absolutely. And I am proud to say I am not editing this one.
I am editing this one. It's going to be a while. I better get on it.
I hope I didn't make it too much longer.
Oh, man. Well, you know, it's our fault for inviting you. So,
yeah, it'll be fine. Anyway, but this is the Butterburger production, and the music is probably going to be all by me. Okay, so should we say goodbye? Are we done?
We should. Yeah, we'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. I think maybe, who knows? This might be the episode where we launch our Patreon. We'll see.
Cool.
So,
okay.
Probably. Yeah. And by the way, we should say we I don't think we're going to have another episode before we do this. So we should say we're going to be on Joe's show, man. Daily Hi-Fi.
Joe Mariano.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about that?
No, because we don't know much about it, but we're going on.
Okay. And Aaron's going to be on there with us?
Yeah, Aaron's going to be on. It should be an animated conversation, but we'll put a link into wherever you find out more about that.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
We'll see you in a few weeks, guys.
Bye, everybody.
Doug, thank you again, man.
Thanks, Doug.
Hey, it was fun being on.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Okay, we're done.
Hey there, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you enjoyed this episode and you wish that there had been more of it, we've got good news for you.
Yeah, you can, if you check out patreon.com/audio unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else does.
Yeah, sometimes it's like a day or two, sometimes it's nearly a week.
And plus, extra bonus, you actually get extended cuts of each episode, which could be like an extra 5-10 minutes. It could be an extra half an hour. It's just whatever we decided that we didn't want to cut, but we had to cut to get to our usual hour.
Yeah, we never know how long it's going to be, but for you, there's only one way to find out.
Yeah, and the way to do that is you subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is, less than I spend on my daily cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks or the library to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/audio unleashed.
Or audio
unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.